What's up, guys? We are so excited to make this video. It's something we've always wanted to learn how to do, and there's been no information on the internet about proper methods. It's a really closely guarded secret, it seems like. We're redoing this decorative plaster molding on the inside. This house is from the 1770s, super old. This molding doesn't exist anywhere, and it got demoed by previous homeowners. We damaged some during construction unavoidably, so we wanted to figure out how to get it back up on the ceiling and have this place look like it did 256, 54 years ago. We talked with 3 or 4 different plaster contractors in the Philadelphia area, and either no one called us back or the numbers they gave us were astronomical. We're talking over $10,000 for maybe about 8 feet of molding. We couldn't justify paying that. Our clients didn't want to pay that much, so we wanted to learn how to do it ourselves. So in this video, we're going to talk about the recipe that we used. We are going to talk about the tools that we use. We're going to talk about some of the tips and tricks. If you stick around to the end, we'll share everything we did wrong, and that is a lot. So hopefully this video can be a reference for you, both ingredients, both techniques, both learning experiences, and what we did differently. Check it out, guys.
There's a couple different ways to construct plaster molding. You can cast it on a bench and adhere it with glue or runny plaster, or you can run it on the wall and ceiling. This method is called in situ, which is Latin for in the natural or original position or place. That's what we're going to try. Since we can't find a mold or trowel for this profile, we're going to make our own. We cut a straight edge into the existing molding, transferred it to cardboard, then to aluminum, then we attached that to a sled that slides on temporary rails. We attached them with Tapcons that we're going to have to patch later. Getting the mix right was an art form in itself. We needed something that was workable, flowable, but still held its shape. After talking to a few retired experts and a ton of experimenting, we were able to come up with a pretty spot-on recipe. The backbone is lime putty, which we sourced locally. Lime is its own art form. Something to consider is that it has to be activated. We spent a few minutes with the paddle mixer knocking up the lime putty to get a nice, creamy consistency. We used plaster of Paris as the hardener and for strength. We also used ultrafine marble dust as an inert filler and for texture. All this can be ordered online and shipped. We'll put some links in the description. We'll walk you through the mixing process right now.
All right, guys, so this part of the video talks about making the recipe that we use for historical plaster molding. Not 100% authentic, but it's worked really well for us. It's nice and workable. We're gonna share the ratios we use right now. Adrian is taking lime putty from a company called Lancaster Lime Works. They're in Pennsylvania, but they do ship all over the country. This is really great carbonating lime putty. It's super high quality, super workable, and it's kind of the consistency of cream cheese right now. So our recipe that we came up with has 2.5 quarts of this lime putty. It should be super workable, hydrated. It's got a really nice, creamy, workable texture to it. So once we have that all measured out, we're gonna plop it up onto our work table. In a perfect world, this would be perfectly level, and we would use melamine or something totally non-porous. We didn't have that. We had a piece of zip sheeting, which is gonna do a great job of holding water. So what we're gonna do, Adrian's got the forbidden bagel, or the forbidden cream cheese right now. So we're gonna kind of flatten it out and make a donut with it. And you'll see why we do that in a second. And the good thing about nitrile gloves, this lime putty, it's not super dangerous, but it's really good to not get on your hands, especially for a prolonged period of time. It's very basic. It will dry your hands out. You're not going to get a burn from this stuff, but again, it's safety is not an accident. So see what Adrian's doing right there? He's making this little gate for our water to stay in. And while he's doing that, I'm going to measure out water. So we have a bucket of water here. Clean water. We've been changing it out every day. And we want to get a 50-50 ratio of plaster of Paris to water. And one of the things that the first batch we kind of learned the hard way is you can't really agitate this stuff too much. It'll speed up the chemical reaction and it will cause the plaster to harden really prematurely. It makes it unworkable. So you really have to be gentle with this stuff. And you can see what Adrian's doing now to account for our uneven condition. He's making this side a little bit thicker. While Adrian is measuring everything up, This ingredient saved our butts on this project. We were having a really hard time getting our plaster to stay malleable and workable long enough. So they make plaster retarders to slow down the chemical reaction. We couldn't find one locally, and we also didn't want to throw more and more chemicals in there. So we found ourselves on plaster blogs, a bunch of old heads that have done this stuff for 50, 60 years, or they used to. No one really does this anymore. They talked about using, adjusting the acidity of the mix to slow down the cure time, and baking powder, not baking soda. It has to be baking powder. We'll do that. And the ratio that has been found to work is about 1 teaspoon per cup. So we have 2.5 quarts that we're getting in there. We are going to use 6 teaspoons of baking powder. I keep wanting to say soda, but it has to be baking powder. We're running out of buckets, but we're going to just mix everything dry in here. So I'm just going to sprinkle it in. Adrian's going to blend everything together. Six. And I can return this now to my pantry so my wife doesn't myrtleize me. So Adrian's gonna keep mixing that stuff up, and I'm gonna prep our water. So the zip system's doing its job. Eventually all this water will go through, which is why I wish we had melamine. But we wanna go for like a 50-50 plaster to water ratio, so that would mean 2.5 quarts of water and 2.5 quarts of plaster of Paris with our retarder in there. We're going to start with 2 cups, just because it's much easier for us to work with when it's a little bit drier, and we can always add more water. It's a little nerve-wracking too, because I hate pouring water onto a table. But this stuff is super sticky, and it's blended up really nicely. So the last part of our recipe is ultra-fine marble dust. This doesn't react with anything. It's pretty much an aggregate and a filler. We don't want to use too much plaster because it's going to dry too quickly. It might get brittle. This will keep the mix soft. It will keep it from being too runny, and it really helps with workability. We're painting this to match the rest of the plaster in the house that's already been painted. But if we weren't, this could be colored differently. You can get black marble dust, brown marble dust, red marble dust, even white marble dust, like this. So it smooths up really nicely and creates a really nice luster. We don't need that right now. So I'm just gonna make like a little barrier here. We don't need to do this if we had a level surface. I just know water escapes through there, and we'll mix the rest in. So I am going to sprinkle this evenly into the water. And we can use And what we want to do, we want to let the water saturate into the plaster without mixing it too much. And once it starts to kind of hydrate itself, that's when we know where it's ready to start mixing. And it'll actually happen pretty quickly too. We've kind of, in our experience, we have about 15 minutes to work once everything's mixed together. So we want to make sure that this is all ready to go. And this really isn't a one-person job. 2 people minimum, 3 people is really helpful, especially when we're working with a camera. One thing to note also, this is a messy process. You can see we have ram board down over the floors. We have tarps in the wet areas where we're going to be, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we don't want to be scrubbing plaster out of the floor grooves and everything else. Over prolonged time, it will start to discolor stain and wood. It's a little bit caustic. The lime putty itself, the plaster is pretty inert. We should be wearing masks ideally. It's hard to talk though. It's also not super, super dusty. So right now I'm just breaking up any clumps. I feel like a cake sifter would be a really nice way to get this in. Yeah. There is a limit though for sure about how much stuff I can steal from my kitchen. And we just don't do this enough to have one of those. But that would be a kind of cool way to get everything really nicely mixed.
Yeah, flour sifter.
But I mean, this is with no mixing whatsoever and it's already starting to blend. So I'm really gently kind of agitating that in there, making sure everything's mixed. Do you want to make sure we have enough room there that we're not going to...
A little bit more to get it mixed in. This is our extra half out.
That's our extra half?
Yeah.
So this brings us up to 2.5 quarts of plaster of Paris.
Yeah. We're a half quart short on water right now, right?
Correct. So we should be a little dry. You can see it's starting to bubble. That's kind of an indication that it's getting close to be ready to be mixed. And that is not too bad for now. We'll smear it off a lot too. All right, let's get mixing. So we're kind of smearing this down, and that's a way to get any lumps out of the lime putty. And we're using a lot of downward force. This stuff really is like cream cheese. So there's no real shortcuts for this. You can't really use a drill mixer because that'll speed up the reaction, the cure time too quickly. So it just requires some patience to do with hand. You have to work quickly because time is limited. We have a finite amount of working time with this, but we want to keep it from curing too quickly. Again, we tried using a big drill mixer, a big cement mixer. It worked great. We had a great consistency for about 3 minutes, and then it started to harden in the bucket. We weren't using a retarder when that was happening, but I'm gonna start mixing in some more of this marble dust. That should absorb a little bit more of the water and keep us a little more workable. And these big spackle blades really help with this. When you're working with lime putties, the process is called knocking it up, and that includes mixing it. The lime putty can be mixed with a big mixer, and the more the better with that. That really activates the way the lime works and makes sure it blends smoothly and there's no lumps in it. But we have a nice creamy consistency here, which really makes it a lot easier to mix. So you can see it's kind of like curdled yogurt or curdled milk right now. We're kind of working through that, and Adrian is doing a really good job of smearing everything down and kind of breaking it up. But yeah, the timer is on. And me and Adrian have done this a couple times, so we have a decent workflow. It's like we're finishing each other's sandwiches. He did it.
So we're starting to get a really nice mix. Adrian is smearing the material around and working out the air, the same motion as spreading out a crepe. I'm loading up a hawk. One of the ways we can test to see if lime-based products are knocked up well is if it sticks to your tools while upside down. This is critical to make sure it's going to stick to our ceiling too. The whole mixing process took about 15 minutes and it was pretty non-stop.
In our first attempt at putting up our compound, we had some big issues with slumping and having the substrate falling off of the ceiling. So we revisited our whole approach, and there's two things that we wanted to use to make sure that the plaster we're putting up on the ceiling is going to stay there for a long time. First is going to be a mechanical fastener, which we are using drywall screws. The head of the screws are going to be sticking out from the ceiling just a little bit. It's going to help to hold on to that plaster as a mechanical bonding agent. And then the other big thing we're going to be using is plaster weld. This is a chemical bonding agent that's going to really help our plaster to adhere to the existing conditions up on the ceiling. This stuff is great because you can start working on it immediately as soon as it's applied to the paintbrush, or you have up to 10 days to add on to it. After that, you're going to want to recoat that area. Really, you just have to make sure the area has been properly sanded, free of debris, and we also went ahead and scored up the whole area, made sure we had a nice rough area to get a nice bond to.
We installed tracks to the walls and ceilings and made multiple passes with a relatively wet plaster blend. This took a lot of doing and what looked like undoing, but was actually part of the process. Check out one of the sections we did right now.
So there's no really avoiding this. It's going to be messy. So it's very important to kind of do this in small stages as well. I talk like we have a ton of experience with this, but it's our first time. It's based on what we kind of picked up before. And this mix is kind of perfect right now. So I'm gonna get this on the tracks, use a top rail, you're off the ceiling. Doesn't look like much right now, but it's starting to, and using this trowel will kind of help force it up into the ceiling, get some of those air bubbles out, and that suction is gonna be one of the methods that holds the plaster in place. So we have three methods. We have mechanical with the score marks and the screws, we have suction, and we have a chemical adhesion too with the plaster weld and the plaster. Oh.
Damn, son.
I know. I want to edit this out, but I'm not going to.
Hot filled.
And can I get the M12?
You got a proud screw?
Yeah, right here. I think part of the reason we like this so much is because it's inherently a little messy. It's kind of like playing around. So I can start to see where I'm going to be low in some areas. It's really something that comes with practice, managing all this. I'm really glad we have plaster because it is a mess. Or I'm sorry, I'm really glad that we have plastic because it is a mess. As this stuff starts to firm up, we'll lose less of it.
Fucking looks like shit.
Says Terry happily. So you see it's starting to take shape, and this will also tell us where we need to add more material in. And it's starting to firm up a little bit. Part of that's the chemical cure time, part of that is us working and agitating it and speeding that up. So we're gonna hit to a critical point soon where we need to start cleaning up, and also knowing that we're not gonna get this perfect in one pass. And that if we're doing everything right with the tracks and the tool, that we can come back and touch everything up. So I know it looks like I'm undoing the work when we have that stuff that's formed well, but we're also just filling in the areas that we know are low. All right, so it's starting to firm up. It's about twice the thickness as it was when we started, which is where we want it. You can see it's starting to take shape. And part of this, again, is recognizing where we're gonna be able to get it on the first pass, and part of it is knowing when we can save it for the second pass. So I think I have 1 or 2 more full passes left. So I'm gonna go with a couple more passes. Down goes Fraser.
Flush with the ceiling and the back form. Fuck yeah.
This is the form that we were using to get the long run, right? It's nice, it's sturdy. We can set it on the track and it'll run straight. The issue is we've got this tiny little corner here that it's not really long enough for us to get this in there, run properly. So what we've done is we've made this little jig right here. We're gonna use that to run the corner first. We're gonna need to make another one for just these details. And you can see, the flatter ones that are right here. But for now, we're gonna work on getting the corner in with this guy. It might come out a little bit more shaky, a little more wavy, but it's tucked away in the corner. We're gonna smooth it out with some brushes. Let's see how it goes.
So if you watched this far, you can see how it's a really evolving process. We run a pass, we make some adjustments, we run another pass. A lot of what we do has to deal with finishing the plaster to make sure it looks smooth. We're not going to get perfect. We accept that. We know that. It would look weird if it was perfect. And the rest of the plaster is a couple 100 years old. So what we're doing, we're using a spray bottle to mist the plaster as it's curing, and that gives us a little bit more work time. One of the tools we found really useful was a paintbrush soaked in water. We could use that to kind of homogenize everything on the ceiling, blend out any blemishes and imperfections. And a kind of use that we discovered for the paintbrush was the back side of it. There's a really nice wooden point that was really nice for us to tool the inside of the grooves. We used a wet sponge, and yeah, eventually we got a really passable plaster molding, which shocked everyone, ourselves the most. So this video got pretty complicated pretty fast because it's really not an easy thing to do. One of the reasons why no one wanted to take this job was because it was 6 corners over 8 feet, and corners really make or break the project. You can see we have this really intricate detail in the corners. There's an inside and outside detail with a rosette in them, so we can't run that in place with a tool. We have to cast that in plaster separately, and we're going to do that by making a silicone mold. There's a company called Smooth On that has a product called Rebound 25. We're going to make a full video about how we applied that, how we formed everything, the materials we used to make the cast, and how we adhered that to the ceiling. Dealing with the rosettes is its own separate animal we actually haven't quite figured out yet. We are probably going to work with a ceramic studio to make a rosette that fits in there, and we might even have them inscribe the initials of the homeowners as a little treat to them and a nod for the history of the house. Keep an eye out. If you're not doing so already, subscribe, drop us a like, a comment, and we'll see you on the next video.